على من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Then inshallah we'll continue and pick back up with the reading from the book known as Al-Awsat fi Sunani wal-Ijma'i wal-Ikhtilaf li Abi Bakr Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mundhir rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 318. And we're in the section that deals with, as the author entitled it, ذكر النوع الثاني الخارج عن الجسد المختلف في وجوب الطهارة من ذكر الطهارة من دم الاستحاضة. This section is the second category of the things that the body expels, and it is the category of things that there is disagreement about. And this about there's disagreement about its obligation, or there is disagreement about the obligation of purification because of it. And this chapter is the chapter regarding purification because of istihaada, bleeding. The bleeding, that non-period, that non-menstrual bleeding that comes from the vagina. We talked about the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned that this position or this topic, does the person need to perform purification because of non-menstrual bleeding or istihaada? And he mentioned that there are 5 opinions. The first of them that he mentioned was that it was obligatory for every salah, that the individual needs to make a wudu for every salah. And he attributed this statement to Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ibn Abbas and Aisha and Urwa from the Tabi'een. And this was the opinion that was adopted by Imam al-Shafi'i and likewise Imam Ahmed rahimahullah ta'ala, and likewise, if I'm not mistaken, yes, likewise Imam Malik. Naam. And other than them, from the scholars from the different madhahib that were known during that time. And all of that we've mentioned previously. This was the first opinion, that you should take a wudu for every salah. And we mentioned the caveat that Imam Ahmed, he said that you should take a ghusl for every salah. And then if you can't take a ghusl for every salah, then take a ghusl and combine the combinable salah. And then if you can't take a ghusl for every combinable salah, then make a wudu for every salah. And we said, as we'll see soon, that this view of Imam Ahmed rahimahullah ta'ala was trying to gather between all of the views, or some or different multitude of the views, multiple different views, which is something that Imam Ahmed rahimahullah ta'ala he would do often. He would gather between multiple different views to try to make sure he could accomplish as much of the sunnah or the way of the salaf as possible. Then we mentioned the second opinion. The second opinion was تغتسل لكل يوم غسلا واحدا, that the individual should take, that this woman should take a ghusl every day. That the woman should take a ghusl every day. And from the time period is from dhuhr to dhuhr. Every dhuhr she should take a ghusl. And this view was attributed to Aisha, as well as Sa'id ibn Musayyib, as well as Hassan al-Basri. And we mentioned the narrations that the author mentioned in this view. And likewise, the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he attributed it to Ibn Abbas and Ali. قال تغتسل لكل صلاة فقال ابن عباس. No, I'm sorry. No. The second opinion was the opinion of, attributed to Aisha and Sa'id ibn Musayyib and Hassan al-Basri. That was the second opinion, that she takes a ghusl once a day. Now we can reach to the third view. This third view, the author rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وقالت فرقة ثالثة تغتسل لكل صلاة. روي هذا القول عن علي وابن عباس وابن عمر وابن الزبير. قال حدثنا. He says, so the third view, or a third group says that she should take a ghusl for every salah. That the woman who has this non-menstrual bleeding upon her is to take a ghusl for every salah. He says, in this view, or this statement, has been reported on the authority of Ali ibn Abi Talib, as well as Ibn Abbas, as well as Ibn Umar, as well as Ibn Zubayr. right? So this is 4 of the Sahaba that he mentioned that seem to have had statements that support this issue. One quick note is that a person might notice that in the first opinion, he attributed it to Ibn Abbas, and he attributed it to Aisha, and he attributed it to who else? Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so the second opinion, he attributed to Aisha. And the third opinion, he attributed to Ibn Abbas and Ali ibn Abi Talib again. And this is not something that is strange. Sometimes we'll see that statements of the Salaf, sometimes there's not a direct quote. What I mean by this, how can I explain it? Sometimes when somebody attributes a view to the Salaf, they're taking a particular narration, and because this particular version or this particular narration has the information in it, then they attribute that statement to be the statement of that Sahabi or that individual from the Salaf. Although that individual from the Salaf might have multiple different narrations that have come from them, whether there be narrations that have come over different time periods or perhaps during different situations. So it's not uncommon to see that one group of scholars will say that this was the opinion of Ibn Abbas, for example. And they'll mention that Ibn Abbas said the woman had to take a ghusl for every salah, because they find a narration where this is the answer that Ibn Abbas gave. While another group of scholars will say, no, the opinion of Ibn Abbas was that she has to take a wudu for every salah, because they find a narration where this is the answer that Ibn Abbas gave. And so for this reason, this is one of the reasons why you'll find scholars disagreeing, because they're all holding on to a different version of a narration. And this goes back to what we just mentioned about Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah. One of the things that makes his madhab stick out is his desire to try to gather up and combine between all of the statements, to not leave off any of them. So when he finds these two opinions from Ibn Abbas, you'll find him saying both opinions. And for this reason, similar to how it was with the Salaf from the Sahaba, how they might have multiple opinions, the madhab of Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah ta'ala, is one that includes multiple opinions because of his desire to always utilize all of the different narrations. So don't be taken aback when you see here that in this third opinion, it's attributed to Ibn Abbas and Ali, and it's something different than the first opinion that was attributed to them as well. And likewise, the first opinion was attributed to Aisha, while the second opinion that she should take a ghusl once a day was also attributed to her. There's no conflict there, whether it's just different occurrences or different situations, or it might have been an old opinion versus a new opinion, or it might be something where the narration has some weakness in it or was worded differently. All of these things are what we do in fiqh to try to put the information together. But don't let it be something that causes you confusion or loss when it comes to you that this Sahabi said it one way and then said it a different way at another instance. So in this third opinion, the author, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, that this group, they say that the woman should take a ghusl for every salah. And this has been reported on the authority of Ali, as well as Ibn Abbas, as well as Ibn Umar, as well as Ibn az-Zubair, Abdullah ibn az-Zubair. The author, he mentions the chain to these people to support his claim that these are the statements that they made. And this is why we also always want to read the statements themselves, because just to say that Ibn Abbas said it, maybe I understand the narration different than you, or maybe I can put them together in a way different than you. And so this is why books like this are so important, because they're not just the statement of an individual that so-and-so said. When you look at the later books of fiqh, it's always just, this was the opinion of so-and-so, and that was the opinion of so-and-so, without there being an actual establishment of their statement so we can see what they said. But from the things that make this religion distinguished is the isnad, and what the isnad ends at from the statement of these pious predecessors from the Sahaba and those who came after them. So the author here, he mentions his chain to each of these individuals, and he says, حدثنا إسحاق عن عبد الرزاق عن ابن جريج قال أخبرني أبو الزبير أن سعيد بن جبير أخبره قال أرسلت امرأة مستحاضة إلى ابن الزبير غلاما لها أو مولا لها أني مبتلاة لم أصلي منذ كذا وكذا حسبت أنه قال منذ سنتين وإني أنشدك الله إلا ما بينت لي في ديني. قال وكتبت إليه أني أفتيت أن أغتسل لكل صلاة. فقال ابن الزبير ما أجد لها إلا ذلك. ثم جاء ابن عمر وابن عباس فقال ما نجد لها إلا ذلك. This narration is a interesting one, and it is a nice glimpse into the life of the Sahaba. In this narration, it says that Ishaq narrated to us on the authority of Abdul Razak as-San'ani, and you could probably find this in the Musannaf of Abdul Razak. And Ibn Jurayj, on the authority of Ibn Jurayj, Abdul Malik ibn Abdul Aziz ibn Jurayj, he said, أخبرني أبو الزبير أن سعيد بن جبير, Sa'id ibn Jubair, the student of Ibn Abbas, informed him that a woman who was having this non-menstrual bleeding, this Istihaada bleeding, she sent to Ibn Zubair a young boy of hers. She had a servant boy or a child that she sent to Ibn Zubair. And this is most likely during his time in Mecca. This is most likely during his time as the one in charge of Mecca. So she sent to Ibn Zubair a young boy of hers or a freed slave of hers, saying to him, to tell Ibn Zubair that I am a woman who has been afflicted, and I have not prayed since such and such a time. And I think, Sa'id ibn Jubair is saying, and I think that he said, or should we say Abu Zubair is saying, that I think that slave boy said, that Sa'id said, or Sa'id is saying that I think that slave boy said, but most likely Abu Zubair is saying that I think Sa'id ibn Jubair mentioned the time being 2 years. So here we have a woman who has not prayed for 2 years because she was bleeding. And this shows you that in the early stages of Islam, if you didn't know what to do, you just didn't do. Right? Somebody might want to criticize her retroactively and say, well, why didn't she just pray anyway? How can you go 2 years without praying? But the Salaf were different. They understood that if I don't have knowledge, I can't worship. And if I don't know what to do in a circumstance, then the religion, I need to ask. Now, one might say, well, why does she wait so long? And that could be valid. But the point of it is that they wouldn't act without knowledge. And so she said, I didn't pray for 2 years, or I didn't pray since such and such a time. And it's the narrator thought that Sa'id ibn Jubair said for 2 years. And the woman goes on telling her young boy to tell Ibn Zubair, and I ask you by Allah that you clarify to me my religion, that you make it clear to me what I should do in my religion. And so she said, the woman said, وَكَتَبَتْ إِلَيْهِ, she also wrote, so the narrator, Sa'id ibn Jubair, he says, and she also wrote to him, to Ibn Zubair, saying that I have been given the fatwa that I should bathe for every salah. So this woman asked someone else, and whoever else she asked told her that she needs to bathe for every salah. And this shows us that it is permissible to ask multiple people when you don't know. If you don't know something, it is permissible to ask multiple people. So she asked this individual who she doesn't name, and after that, she asked somebody of more authority, being Abdullah ibn Zubair, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. So she said, I've been given the fatwa that I should bathe for every salah. So Ibn Zubair, he responded by saying, I don't see anything other than that. I haven't found any answer other than that you need to bathe for every salah. I haven't found anything other than that. And then Ibn Umar and Ibn Abbas came. They got involved in the situation as well, whether it be that they were in the presence of Ibn Zubair or whether the slave boy asked them as well. But the two of them said, we don't find anything for her other than that. Meaning all three of these individuals in this narration prescribed upon this woman that she bathe for every salah, as well as the unnamed individual that she mentioned. And these three individuals, it's important to note about them that they are known as three of the four Abadilah, three of the four Sahaba who were known as the four Abdullahs. The four Abdullahs were from the younger Sahaba who, during the end of their time, when they became the elder statesmen, that if they agreed on something, the people would usually consider it to be the religion of Allah. The four Abdullahs being Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Zubair, and Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. These four Abdullahs, known as Al-Abadilah, the four Abdullahs, were from the younger Sahaba that were given a longer life to the people, relied on them for their religion. And when they would agree on something, the people would consider it often to be the religion of Allah. And so in this narration, you have three of these Abdullahs, all of them saying the same thing, that this woman has to make a ghusl for every salah. So this is the narration that leads to these three individuals. Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he goes on, he says, حدثنا علي ibn al-Hasan, قال حدثنا عبد الله عن سفيان عن عبد الله ابن مسلم عن سعيد بن جبير عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنه أن امرأة جاءت فقالت إن استحط منذ كذا وكذا وقد حدثت أن عليا قال تغتسل لكل صلاة فقال ابن عباس ما أجد لها إلا ما قال علي. This narration is similar, and maybe it's an insight into the previous narration, or maybe it's a different occurrence. But in any circumstance, the narration, it reads that Ali ibn al-Hasan narrated to us. He said that Abdullah narrated to us on the authority of Sufyan, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Muslim, on the authority of Sa'id ibn Jubair, the same narrator from before, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, that a woman came and she said, I have been afflicted with this non-menstrual bleeding since such and such a time. And I was told that Ali said that the woman like this should take a ghusl for every salah. And so Ibn Abbas replied, Ma ajidu laha illa ma qala Ali. I don't find any other answer for her except or besides that which Ali said. The only answer I know is what Ali mentioned. And so is Ali the unnamed individual that she was referring to in the narration, or somebody who told her about Ali in the previous narration? Is this the same occurrence? It's possible. Or it's possible it can be a different occurrence, but in any situation, it establishes this opinion as one attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so now we have another addition to those who say that she should bathe for every salah. So these are the first three opinions. She should make a wudu for every salah. She should make a ghusl once a day. She should bathe for every salah. The fourth opinion, the author, he says, وقالت فرقة رابعة تجمع بين الظهر والعصر بغسل واحد وتجمع بين المغرب والعشاء بغسل واحد وتغتسل للفجر غسلا روي هذا القول عن ابن عباس وهي الرواية الثالثة عنه. The author, he says, and the fourth group says that she should combine between Dhuhr and Asr with one ghusl. And she should combine between Maghrib and Isha with one ghusl. And then she should make a separate ghusl for Fajr. And this statement has been reported on Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, or radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, and it is now the third opinion attributed to him. This is now the third narration attributed to Ibn Abbas. So she should combine between Dhuhr and Asr, combine between Maghrib and Isha, making a ghusl for each one of them, i.e. for each one of the time periods that she combines in, and then likewise making a separate ghusl for Salat al-Fajr. And this is something that is known as Ashab al-Dururat, the people of needs and necessities. There are circumstances that can happen in the life of a person that make it permissible for them to combine. And combining the salat does not necessitate shortening the salat. While traveling, an individual can combine and shorten. While traveling, an individual can combine and shorten. But there are things that can happen in the city while an individual is a resident that allows them to combine, but it doesn't allow them to shorten. For example, scarcity of water, or should we say a hardship in obtaining water. Ibn Taymiyyah talks about if there's a village that has a well that is a far distance. And so if they need to make wudu from the well in every occasion, it becomes a hardship upon them to consistently or constantly go to the well for every salat. They can go to the well, make wudu, and then combine, because the combining in the masjid, obtaining the jama'ah, is an important thing to accomplish. Likewise, in this situation, if the woman has this non-menstrual bleeding, rain, we've seen hardships of different types, coldness, right? This is something that is under the discretion of the imam. Some of them even mention that it's something that is allowable to be done for any justifying reason in order to not make it difficult upon the Muslims. Meaning, if there's a valid reason that is not one of the things stipulated in the other narrations, but it's something that will make it easy upon the Muslims to combine, then it's lawful to combine occasionally, right? And some of them mention it doesn't even have to be a reason other than to not be put into a hardship. And the hadith of Ibn Abbas in this issue is well known. In order to not make things difficult upon his ummah. The main thing, though, for individuals who adopt this view that it's permissible to combine in various situations, is that they not take that as a custom, and that they not take that as a norm, because the salat has prescribed times for a reason. And for this reason, you find a lot of scholars saying that no, it's not permissible to combine except for the reasons that have been legislated. And then even after that, from the scholars are those who say it's not permissible to combine ever, right? And obviously, perhaps the truth is somewhere in the middle of all of that. But the point is that Ibn Abbas, the author is saying, has a statement that the woman can combine making a ghusl for Dhuhr and Asr, and then praying the two of them together. 4 raka'at and 4 raka'at. And then she can make a ghusl for Maghrib and Isha and pray the two of them at the same time. 3 raka'at and 4 raka'at. And then when it's Fajr time, she would make a ghusl for Fajr and pray it 2 raka'at. So she wouldn't shorten, but she would combine praying each time period with one ghusl. What is the evidence that this is a view of Ibn Abbas? He says, حدثنا إسحاق and عبد الرزاق and معمر and أيوب and سعيد بن جبير أن امرأة من أهل الكوفة كتبت إلى ابن عباس كتابا فإذا في الكتاب إن امرأة أصابني بلاء وضر وإني أدعو الصلاة الزمان الطويل وإن علي بن أبي طالب سئل عن ذلك فأفتاني أن أغتسل عند كل صلاة. قال فقال ابن عباس اللهم لا أجد لها إلا ما قال علي غير أنها تجمع بين الظهر والعصر بغسل واحد والمغرب والعشاء بغسل واحد وتغتسل للفجر غسلا واحدا. نعم. So this narration, he says, and this narration is going to give us more insight into the previous narration of Sa'id ibn Jubair on Ibn Abbas. Alhamdulillah. And this is why it's important to read the books like the Musannafat that we go over in other classes, because they clarify by an abundance of riwayat, by an abundance of narrations, multiple narrations of the same event, it gives us a better look into the instance or into the occurrence and the circumstance at hand. And it allows us to understand why there might be multiple views from one companion. So, for example, in the last narration, it said that Ibn Abbas said, I only see the answer that Ali gave. But now let's see what it says here. He says that Ishaq narrated to us on the authority of Abdul Razzaq, on the authority of Ma'mar, on the authority of Ayyub, on the authority of Sa'id ibn Jubayr, mashallah, that a woman from the people of Kufa wrote to Ibn Abbas a letter, or she wrote a book or wrote a letter or wrote a correspondence to Ibn Abbas. And in her correspondence, it read, I am a woman who has been afflicted with a tribulation and harm. And indeed, I have abandoned Salat for a long time. And indeed, Ali ibn Abi Talib was asked about that. And he gave me the fatwa that I should bathe for every Salat. And so Ibn Abbas responded by saying, Oh Allah, I don't know for her any answer except what Ali said, except that she can combine between Dhuhr and Asr with one ghusl, and combine between Maghrib and Isha with one ghusl. And then she can make a ghusl for Fajr, just one ghusl. And so in this narration, it gives us a little bit more insight into that same event. And perhaps it's that same woman. She asked somebody who asked Ali, and then they wrote to Ibn Abbas while also writing to Ibn Zubair to try to get the answer to this question. And this answer that is attributed to Ibn Abbas, it has a little bit more detail that, yes, you have to make a ghusl for every salat, but because of the hardship, you can combine and you can pray Dhuhr and Asr at the same time. Instead of making a ghusl for Dhuhr in its earlier time and then a ghusl for Asr in its earlier time, delay Dhuhr and advance Asr and make one ghusl. That way you can pray them both together or something in this fashion. Now, so that is the fourth opinion. Who adopted this opinion from the scholars? The author, he says, وَبِهِ قَالَ عَطَاء ibn Abi Rabah وإبراهيم النخعي وكان الأوزاعي يعجبه هذا القول فإن فإنها أخبرته أنها لا تقوى على ذلك فإن أخبرته أنها لا تقوى على ذلك أمرها أن تغتسل من ظهر إلى ظهر وتتوضأ لكل صلاة. He says from the people that have said this statement is Ata ibn Abi Rabah, yani the Imam of Mecca, وإبراهيم النخعي, one of the Imams of Kufa, وكان الأوزاعي. Al-Awza'i was the Imam of Sham, right? His madhab was popular and prominent in Sham, and it was also popular and prominent in Northern Africa. As the Muslims conquered North Africa, this madhab had dominance before the madhab of Imam Malik in that region. The author, he says, and Al-Awza'i was particularly amazed by this statement. He really liked this statement, i.e. that she should take a ghusl for every salat, but combine between the combinable. But if the woman informed him that she was unable, she didn't have the strength to do this, to take 3 ghusls a day, he would command her to just bathe from dhuhr till dhuhr and to make wudu for every salat. So this is the fourth opinion. One thing to consider in all of this, and obviously there are narrations, the author is going to mention some of them from the Prophet ﷺ about this topic, but remember, in the author's view, there's nothing established from the Prophet about this fact. And so one thing to remember is all of these determinations are therefore statements that don't have more weight than the other. And we see that even the scholars who answered these questions, a lot of times they would transition from one opinion to the other. So, for example, Imam Ahmed, make a ghusl for every salat. I can't do so. Okay, make a ghusl and combine. I can't do so. Okay, make wudu for every salat. If it was something that was necessary, would they have the ability to give these options? Al-Awza'i really liked this opinion, combine between every salat and make a ghusl. But if the woman told him he was unable to do so, well, just make a ghusl every day and make wudu for every salat. If this was something that was legislated and mandatory, would they have the leverage, or would they have the ability in the religion to make this what is called a wajib al-mukhayyar? Is this something that they have the ability to give the woman the choice in the matter if it was something that was mandatory? And this is one of the arguments, as we're going to see, of the people who say that it's not mandatory for her to do anything, right? Because if it was something that was mandatory, how could we give her so many options? Unless it was an obligation that was open and vast, but none of the narrations that they use for supporting this issue state such a fact. And so this is one of the things that strengthen the opinion of those who say the woman doesn't have to do anything. If she's bleeding blood of Istihaada, she doesn't have to make a ghusl. She doesn't have to make wudu. She just prays. And we'll see why that statement is reasonably accurate. And then we'll see the one caveat that the author gives about adopting that statement. But the thing to consider here is that you have all of these different opinions, and they are opinions, they are views, as according to the view of the author, because there's nothing authentically narrated in this matter. And in addition to that, you find that people who have these views often giving other options. So if a person breaks their wudu, for example, do we tell them make wudu? And if they say, well, I can't make wudu, okay, well, make tayammum. And what I mean when they say I can't make wudu, like it's hard, it's difficult, I don't want to. Okay, make tayammum. No, we say, no, you got to make wudu. As long as there's water there, you got to make wudu. And you don't have an option. But in this issue of the woman who's bleeding the istihaada blood, some of them say make a ghusl. Some of them say make wudu. Some of them say combine. Some of them say make a ghusl every day. Some of them say make a ghusl every salat. But you find a lot of them giving options. And so if it was something that was necessary, could they give options in that matter? The author, he goes on to say, talking about this fifth opinion. And this fifth opinion is what we just mentioned, the opinion that the woman doesn't have to do anything. Right? The woman doesn't have to do anything. And this is a great example, in my opinion, in this book of how to be Salafi. This is a great example that he's about to mention right here in the fifth opinion about how to be Salafi. He says, وَقَدْ حُقِيَ أَنْ رَبِيعَ ابن أبي عبد الرحمن قول خامس وهو أن لا وضوء على المستحاضة لكل صلاة إلا أن يصيبها حدث بعد وضوئها من بول أو ريح أو ما أشبه ذلك مما ينقض الوضوء. He says, and there is a fifth view reported on Rabi'a ibn Abi Abdul Rahman, who is also known as Rabi'atul Ra'i, right? The Rabi'a of view, right? The Rabi'a of fiqh. He was the teacher of Imam Malik from the Tabi'in, Rabi'atul Ra'i, Rabi'a ibn Abi Abdul Rahman. A fifth view is narrated from him, and it is that there is no wudu upon the woman who is non-menstrually bleeding. The woman who has istihada bleeding, she's bleeding for reasons other than menses out of her vagina, then she has no wudu is necessary upon her for every salat, unless she does something that breaks her wudu besides that. If she passes gas, if she falls asleep, if she eats camel meat, there's no wudu upon the woman who has istihada bleeding for every salat, unless she does some other hadith besides that nullifies her wudu from urination or passing gas or things similar to that nullify wudu. So Rabi'a is saying the blood doesn't matter. Upon her is if she breaks her wudu some other way to make wudu, i.e., and if she breaks her ghusl some other way, then upon her is to make a ghusl. But as far as this blood, then it has no effect. There is no rules that are necessary upon her because of this blood. That is the fifth opinion. Yalla, we'll try to finish it real quick. It's only a half a page. He says, وقد روينا عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أربعة أخبار يوافق كل خبر منها قولا من هذه الأقوال. He says, and indeed we have narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam 4 narrations. Each narration from them supports one of these opinions that we have mentioned, i.e., one of the 4 opinions that we have mentioned to begin with. So there's a narration from the Prophet that says she has to make a ghusl for every salah. And there's a narration from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says she has to make a wudu for every salah, should I say, the first one. And then a ghusl once a day. And then a ghusl for every salah. And then a ghusl for every salah, but she can combine between the combinable. There are 4 narrations of the Prophet, each of them supporting one of those views. He says, غَيْرُ قَوْلُ رَبِيعَةٍ. The only one that doesn't have a hadith of the Prophet to support it is the opinion of Rabi'ah. وَقَدْ تُكُلِّمَ فِي أَسَانِيدِهَا وَالنَّظْرُ الدَّالِ عَلَى مَا قَالَ رَبِيعَةٍ. And all of the narrations that we've mentioned, these 4 narrations that support each one of these 4 opinions other than the opinion of Rabi'ah, all of them, there is criticism about their chain. All of these narrations, there is some criticism as it relates to their chain. So this is the reason why he didn't include it in the section that dealt with that which has come in the Sunnah. Because this is from him an invalidation, a deeming of inauthenticity of the narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this matter. Whether it be the inauthenticity is due to weakness in the narrators, or whether it be the inauthenticity is due to iftirab or instability in the chain or in the metin, to where it's unknowable what the correct view was. We can't discern or determine who reported it correctly, so we just have to abandon them all. He is saying that all of the narrations that have come in this regard of what to do if a woman bleeds because of this non-menstrual blood, all of the narrations that instruct her on what to do, all of them have weakness in their chain. He goes on to say, وَالنَّظْرُ دَالٌ عَلَى مَا قَالَ رَبِيعَةٍ. And reasoning supports what Rabi'ah mentions. Rabi'ah's opinion, the 5th opinion, is supported by reason. His opinion is the most logical opinion. Why does he say that? And he'll explain himself, but so we can understand up front. He says that because when it comes time to make wudu, you have to stop doing the thing that broke your wudu. And when it comes time to make a ghusl, you have to stop doing the thing that nullified your ghusl. So if the thing that is happening is still happening as a chronic problem, meaning this blood is continuously flowing and you can't stop it. Urine is constantly coming out and you can't stop it. Gas is constantly passing and you have no control over it. Then that action, its presence is the same as its absence. Because if it breaks your wudu, it breaks your wudu every time you do it. And if it doesn't break your wudu, then why do you need to make wudu because of it? So if you're going to say that the blood that this woman is experiencing nullifies her wudu, then why does it nullify her wudu at the time of one salat, but doesn't nullify it during the time she's making salat? And if you say, well, it's because she has a chronic problem, then we'll say, okay, her chronic problem means that the blood never bothers her at all. There's something she can't control. وَلَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. Allah doesn't burden an individual more than it can handle. And if that is the case, then why does she need to make wudu for dhuhr and not for asr? Or a ghusl for dhuhr and not for asr? She's still bleeding. Well, she needs to make a ghusl because it resembles period blood. But it's not period blood. And if you say she needs to make a ghusl because it resembles period blood in dhuhr, then it resembles period blood in asr. Well, she needs to make a ghusl for every salah. Why does she need to make a ghusl? Because it resembles period blood. But her husband can have intercourse with her. and she can pray. If it was period blood, she wouldn't be able to pray. And so, like, this is the reasoning or the logic why the opinion of Rabi'a, the author is saying, makes most sense logically. All of the other people say these opinions that we mentioned, 1 through 4, but the one that makes most sense is the opinion of Rabi'a. And then we add to it, there's no authentic narration in the author's opinion. Right, we understand all that. But this is what I mean when it says this is a good example of how to be Salafi. The author, he says right after saying that, إِلَّا أَنَّ قَوْلَهُ لَا أَعْلَمُ أَحَدًا سَبَقَهُ إِلَيْهِ. The only thing is, I don't know anybody who said that statement before Rabi'a. I don't know of anyone who said that the woman doesn't have to do something before Rabi'a. I know some Sahaba said a ghusl for every salah. I know some Salaf said a ghusl and combined. I know some Sahaba said a wudu for every salah. I know some of the Tabi'een mentioned a ghusl once a day. But I don't know anybody before Rabi'a who said she don't have to do nothing. And this is in spite of the fact that Rabi'a is from the Tabi'een, right? Rabi'a Turra'i is from the Tabi'een. He said, I don't know nobody before him who said it, right? And so that is giving him pause from adopting this statement. And like this, you should be as well, ya ayyuha salafi. Don't be quick to be the first one to have a view or to come with that strange opinion that nobody before you stated. Let the thing that gives you pause be the fact that the scholars were always saying this. And I don't know nobody who said something different before them. Until you find somebody who says something different before them. And then if you believe that that opinion is the strongest, then feel free to adopt it. But don't be from those individuals who it's as if Allah has singled you out during this day and age to revive the sunnah in a way that none of the scholars before you have done. In a way that none of the Salaf were upon. You can't find a Sahabi who says your opinion. And this is something we see that a lot of the youth, yubtala, they are afflicted with this. They learn the principles of the religion and some qawaid and some evidence, and then they go on to start applying these things and telling their people, well, you know, this is how it should be done. It's just the Muslims ain't been doing it for so long. No, don't be like that. The Muslims have been praying Taraweeh in the masjid. Pray Taraweeh in the masjid, unless you find a view that says, no, Taraweeh at home is better, right? And then if you find that opinion, and you think that opinion is the stronger, then follow it. But don't be quick on the draw to try to be the first one to come up with al-istighrab, they call it. Don't be the first one to be strange with your opinion. So Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, the only thing is I don't find anybody who said this statement. I don't know of anybody who said this statement before Rabi'a. وَإِنَّمَا قُلْتُ النَّظْرُ يُدُلُّ عَلَيْهِ. And the only thing I said was that logic supports it. It's supported by logic. لأنه لا فرق بين الدم الذي يخرج من المستحاضة قبل الوضوء والذي يخرج في أضعاف الوضوء والدم الخارج بعد الوضوء. He says, and this is because there's no difference between the blood that comes out from this non-menstruating woman. There's no difference from the blood that comes out before she makes wudu and the blood that comes out while she's making wudu and the blood that comes out after she's done making wudu. لأن دم المستحاضة إن كان واجب الوضوء إن كان يوجب الوضوء فقليل ذلك وكثيره في أي وقت كان يوجب الوضوء. And this is because the non-menstrual blood, if it is something that necessitates wudu, then a little bit of it or a lot of it at any time it is necessitates wudu. فإذا كان هكذا وابتدأت المستحاضة في الوضوء فخرج منها دم بعد غسلها بعض أعضاء الوضوء وجب أن ينتقض ما غسلت من أعضاء الوضوء لأن الدم الذي يوجب الطهارة في قول من أوجب على المستحاضة الطهارة قائم. He says, and so if that is the case, if the woman who was non-menstrually bleeding began her wudu and then she expelled some blood after washing some of her limbs during wudu, it would be necessary that the portions that she washed would now be invalid. The wudu of those portions would now be invalid because the blood that necessitates purification, in the opinion of those who necessitate purification for the woman who has this bleeding, is present. If that blood happened and she washed her face and then she goes to wash her arm and more blood comes out, her face is no longer clean. Just like if you pass gas during the wudu. If you got to the wiping of your head and then you pass gas, you got to start over. And so if this blood that they're saying she needs to make a ghusl or a wudu because of it necessitated some type of purification, it doesn't matter that she did it during this time. She would have to do it all the time because it breaks the wudu. He says, وَإِنْ كَانَ مَا يَخْرُجُ مِنْهَا بَيْنَ أَضْعَافِ الْوُضُوءِ وَمَا خَرَجَ مِنْهَا قَبْلَ أَنْ تَدْخُلَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمَا حَدَثَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ مِنْهَا لَا يَنْقُضُ طَهَارَةً وجب كذلك أن ما خرج منها بعد فراغها من الصلاة لا ينقض الطهارة إلا بحدث غير دم الاستحاضة. He says, and so if you say on the contrary, that what she expels or what comes out of her during the wudu and what comes out of her before she enters into salat and what comes out of her during the salat does not invalidate her purification, then the same must be true about what comes out of her when she finishes salat. So if she made wudu and then she bled after wudu and before salat and during salat, and you said all of that was fine, then why does the blood that comes after salat necessitate wudu or necessitate a ghusl? He says it should not necessitate a new tahara unless it is accompanied by something that invalidates the tahara that is other than this non-menstrual bleeding. He says, هذا الذي يدل عليه النظر. This is what is proven, or this is what is supported by sound reasoning. مع أن طيب. So the only thing that's stopping him from saying this opinion is that he couldn't find anybody before Rabi'ah who adopted this opinion. It seems to him to be a strange opinion. He says, مع أن قد روينا عن مالك أنه استحب لمن به سلس البول أن يتوضأ لكل صلاة إلا أن يكون البرد يؤذي فإذا آذى قال رجوت أن لا يكون عليه ضيق في ترك الوضوء. He says, and this is in spite of the fact that we have found narrated on the authority of Malik. Malik ibn Anas was the student of Rabi'ah, right? And so this is an important statement. That Malik ibn Anas, he used to prefer for the one who had chronic urination. Chronic urination is when the urine doesn't stop trickling out. You can't control your bladder. You urinate consistently. You might need to wear a colonoscopy bag, whatever they call those things. The bag where you have to catch your urine, or you might have to wrap something around it to stop it from getting everywhere. But the urine consistently comes out. Imam Malik said about a person who has this chronic urination that he prefers that this individual make wudu for every salah, similar to what we mentioned about this person who has this chronic bleeding. He says, unless it's cold, to the extent that the cold will bother him, it will cause him harm. So if the cold will cause him harm, I hope there's no harm on that individual and no difficulty if he just doesn't make wudu at all. And so we see here that Malik has an opinion that kind of supports the view that was attributed to Rabi'ah. Malik is saying a similar thing, which even though he's not before Rabi'ah, it's showing you that some of the Salaf had adopted this statement, that the person who has this chronic hadith, this chronic thing that nullifies their purification, it doesn't negate their purification due to its chronic nature. And that the purification that an individual makes because of it is strictly from the aspect of istihbab. It's strictly from the aspect of preferability. And if you refer to what we mentioned earlier, where how the Sahaba and the scholars would give a person an option, it kind of supports that view because they give the option based on preferability. Make a ghusl for every salah. Sheikh, it's hard. A ghusl for every salah. I don't have that much water. My water bill would be through the roof. I might get sick being wet that many times a day, right? Or it's impossible. I'll be at work sometimes. I can't take a break out of work and go take a ghusl. Oh, you can't do it for every salah? Okay, combine. Make a ghusl for the time periods and combine. But Sheikh, I'm at work. I said, I can't, I go to work from, 9 to 5. So dhuhr and asr, I can't leave my job and go take a ghusl when it's dhuhr time and then pray dhuhr and asr together. Oh, you can't combine the salats together and make a ghusl? Just make a wudu for every salat. You should be able to do that. That's better. Yeah, Sheikh, I can make a wudu. But is that wudu obligatory? Here we see some of the Salaf adopting a view that wudu is just from preferability. Why not make a wudu, right? But does that wudu remove hadith? If you say yes, then why would they need to make another one later? And if you say no, then we would say, why does it matter to make a wudu from it then? Because it didn't remove the hadith. And they are excused from having to purify from this action because that action, they have no control over it. وَلَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. And as far as the rest of the actions, then they had control over those things, so they need to make a wudu from those actions. But this action of chronic urination or chronic bleeding, Allah won't hold them to account for it, so they don't need to make a purification simply for that fact. And then if somebody says, well, what about the ahadith in this issue? The author is saying, well, the ahadith in this issue are invalid. They're not strong. Somebody says, well, what about the statement of all of the Salaf? We say, yeah, that's true. But there are some Salaf who had the opinion that we're mentioning. And in the statement of Imam Malik is a support of the individual who had that opinion. And the Rabi'atul Ra'i was from the Tabi'een. And Imam Malik was from the Atba' Tabi'een. And so perhaps this is enough of a Salafi foundation in this matter to say that this is the stronger opinion, that there is no obligation for purification for chronic conditions. And this is what the author is saying here. He says, نعم وقد زعم يعقوب. طيب, Yaqub is the student of Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, Yaqub, who was a scholar in his own right from the people of Hadith, even though he was from the school of Ra'i, from the students of Abu Hanifa. He said, وَقَدْ زَعْمَ يَعْقُوب أَنَّ الْقِيَاسِ فِي الْجَرْحِ السَّائِلِ وَالْمُسْتَحَاضَةِ أَنْ لَا تَتَوَضَّى. He says, and indeed, Yaqub, the student of Abu Hanifa, he's asserted that sound analogy dictates that an open wound, a running wound, right? A wound that is consistently bleeding, as well as the woman who is the woman who has this non-menstrual bleeding, sound analogy, qiyas, dictates that they shouldn't have to make a wudu. So now you have another Salaf from the Atba' Tabi'een, or from the generation slightly thereafter. Abu Yusuf, Yaqub, from the students of Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa was from the Atba' Tabi'een. I'm not sure if Yaqub reached any of the Tabi'een. But sound reasoning, he says, would dictate or necessitate that an open wound or non-menstrual bleeding, the woman who suffers this or the person who suffers this shouldn't have to make wudu. Qala, yani Yaqub, he said though, وَلَكِنَّا تَرَكْنَا الْقِيَاسِ لِلْأَثَرِ وقد ذكرت في المختصر الذي اختصرت هذا الكتاب منه الآثار التي رويت في هذا الباب وعللها فمن أراد أخذ معرفة ذلك نظر في ذلك الكتاب إن شاء الله. The author, he says in conclusion that Yaqub, he said about this statement, the only reason we didn't say that they don't have to make wudu, right? Sound analogy would dictate as it relates to a running wound or an open wound, or the woman who is suffering non-menstrual bleeding, that they don't have to make wudu. The only reason we've abandoned sound analogy was because of the narration. So he's saying, Yaqub is saying that we would have said this opinion as well, except that we saw the narration that said she should purify herself. And so they adopted that opinion. But the author, he says, in response to this, he says this to show support that this opinion, this intellect, this reasoning is a sound one. And as far as the adoption of the narration, the author, he says, and indeed we mentioned in the summarization that we've summarized this book from. So this book that we're going over, Al-Awsat, is a summarization of another book. And that other book is a summarization of another book called Al-Mabsut. So there's a book that is bigger than this, and then there's a book that is bigger than that. The author, he's saying, and we summarized in the summarization that we summarized this book from, all of the narrations that have been reported in this topic and all of their subtle weaknesses. So he goes into detail in that other book discussing the hadith that have been narrated in this topic and all of their hidden weaknesses and flaws as he sees them. And he says, so whoever wants to know that should look back at that book. They should go back to the book that's above this one, inshallah. And from the things that sadden us extremely is that that book is lost and it's not something we could go back to. And so upon the student, before trying to issue a verdict in this regard and say, oh, you know, you don't have to make wudu if you have Damul Istihaada, you could just pray, is to go and look at the hadith in that issue and to see, does he believe that those hadith are authentic and which one is the strongest? Can he determine, can he decipher? Or does he believe they're all criticizable and flawed as the author believes? And by doing this, he will accomplish a portion of knowledge that will give him the ability to speak about this issue independently. But until then, he should be aware of the differences of opinion and know of them and know of their reasonings and their justification, but still refer the people back to the people of knowledge who can make such verdicts. And that's why this book is not a book of hadith. Although it includes hadith and athar of the Salaf, it's not a book like the Musannaf. The Musannaf is how the Sahaba applied the hadith and how they understood it. This book is a book of fiqh. But as we mentioned before, it's a book of fiqh with narrations. So this book isn't to tell us what the right answer is per se. It's a book to present the different opinions. And the author tells us what his opinion is. And in my opinion, his opinion is reasonable, but I haven't studied the details of those hadith to know is his opinion right. And so until that moment, it stays as an opinion. And I know that there are 5 opinions in this matter: a wudu for every salat, a ghusl once a day, a ghusl for every salat 5 times a day, a ghusl for every salat, but combining between the combinable, so 3 times a day. And then there is an opinion where it says there's no obligation for this blood. The non-menstrual bleeding has no obligation of purification. And this is what the author means when he says it is the things that are disagreed about. And we see that even from the author, he is unsure. He doesn't clearly state what his opinion is. And perhaps this is the reason why he mentioned it as the first thing that there's disagreement about, to show that the disagreement about it is strong. And it's not something that should be at the end of the book. It's something that you should be looking up as soon as possible. As soon as you know what there's agreement about, the next thing you need to know about is this non-menstrual bleeding. We'll stop at that amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.